quiet, hard-working taxi driver in the United States lives by an unshakable moral code, believing that decency is enough to hold a life together. His marriage, modest but steady, is the axis around which his days revolve. That fragile balance collapses when he uncovers his wife's affair with her powerful employer, a betrayal wrapped in silence, intimidation, and social imbalance. Stripped of dignity and forced into invisibility, he faces a choice between disappearing quietly or acting in a way no one expects from a man like him. What follows is a deeply human descent through humiliation, restraint, and resolve, leading to a decision that reverberates far beyond his own life. The city still slept when he turned the key. The engine answered with a familiar vibration, low and patient, as if it understood the rhythm of his life better than anyone else ever had. The streetlights reflected faintly on the hood of the taxi, stretching pale lines across the metal-like veins beneath tired skin. This was the hour he trusted most. Before traffic, before noise, before people demanded things from him without knowing his name, he adjusted the seat, straightened his back, and checked the mirror, not out of vanity, but habit. A man in his early 40s stared back, clean-shaven, lines beginning to settle around the eyes, earned slowly, honestly, nothing remarkable, nothing threatening, the kind of face that disappeared easily in a crowd. Honesty had shaped him the same way time shapes stone, without drama, without shortcuts. He pulled away from the curb, merging into the empty avenue with practiced smoothness. Each movement came from muscle memory built over years of repetition. He knew which intersections would still be red even when no one else was there. He knew which streets smelled faintly of bread, which corners carried the sharp odor of last night's rain mixed with trash. This city had given him a living, and he had repaid it by never cutting corners. Passengers trusted him, not because he demanded it, but because he never gave them a reason not to. Lost wallets always came back. Extra cash left on the seat was returned without comment. Tourists who mispronounced street names were corrected gently, without mockery. Drunk men were delivered home intact. Drunk women were delivered home safely. He never spoke much about it. Good behavior, to him, was not a performance. It was simply the absence of betrayal. By mid-morning, the city had woken fully. Horns layered over each other in impatience. Pedestrians flooded crosswalks with phones glowing in their hands. He navigated through it all with the same quiet precision, as if moving through a current that resisted but never overwhelmed him. His phone vibrated once in the cup holder, a message notification. He waited until he was stopped at a light before glancing down. A simple reminder flashed across the screen, something mundane, something domestic: milk, dry cleaning, pick up after work. The ordinary intimacy of it warmed him. His wife had always been good at remembering the small things. She kept lists in her head the way he kept maps. Together, they had built a life that functioned not because it was passionate or impressive, but because it was reliable. They had met long before either of them imagined who they would become. Before the taxi, before her office job, before routines hardened into expectations. She had laughed easily back then, loudly, the kind of laughter that turned heads in diners and embarrassed him in a way he secretly loved. Marriage had quieted her, but he believed that was normal. People settled. Fire became embers. Stability replaced excitement. He had mistaken silence for peace that evening. He returned home with the sun already low, its light slicing through the narrow gap between buildings. Their apartment sat above a bakery that never quite masked the smell of yeast and sugar. He climbed the stairs slowly, keys resting heavy in his palm. Inside, the apartment looked exactly as it always did. Shoes aligned by the door. A framed photo on the wall taken years ago at a county fair showed them mid-laugh, faces flushed, cotton candy melting in their hands. The image had faded slightly with time, colors duller, edges soft. The quiet felt thicker than usual. He moved through the rooms, setting his keys down, washing his hands at the sink. The water ran too long before he noticed. He turned it off and listened. No television, no music, just the low hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic bleeding through the windows. She was late. Her job had changed in recent months. Longer hours, more pressure. Promotions hovered just out of reach, she said. Expectations grew heavier. He had listened. He had nodded. He had offered reassurance without fully understanding the world she spent her days in. Power lived there. He could tell from the way she spoke about her boss. The name came up often, always framed carefully. Always followed by a pause. Admiration tinged with something else he never quite named. He trusted her. Trust to him was not blind. It was deliberate. When she finally arrived, her movements were efficient, almost rehearsed. She set her bag down, removed her coat, moved past him with a brief touch on the arm that felt more like habit than affection. Her eyes avoided his for just a second too long. He noticed, but he said nothing. Dinner passed quietly. Utensils tapped against plates. Small observations filled the space where conversation used to live. The weather, a road closure downtown, a client meeting that had run late. Her phone lit up once on the table. She flipped it, face down immediately. The gesture was small, almost nothing, but it lodged itself somewhere beneath his ribs, sharp and unwelcome. That night, sleep came unevenly. He lay awake, listening to her breathing, counting the seconds between each rise and fall of her chest. His mind replayed moments that had once seemed insignificant. The way she guarded her phone, the way she showered longer, the way her laughter had returned, but not with him. Days passed. Then weeks. Doubt did not explode into his life. It seeped in, quiet, persistent, like water finding the smallest crack. The discovery did not come from confrontation or confession. Came from chance. A passenger entered his taxi one afternoon, wearing a tailored suit and an air of careless authority. The man spoke into his phone without lowering his voice, words spilling out unfiltered, as if the world existed only as an audience to his importance. The name slipped out casually. His wife's name, followed by laughter, followed by implication. The street blurred in front of him, but his hands remained steady on the wheel. His foot pressed the brake at the right moment. He completed the ride without deviation, without acknowledgement. When the passenger exited, the seat still warm. The truth remained behind like a stain that could not be wiped away. He sat there for a long time after engine idling, city moving around him as if nothing had changed, but everything had. He did not go home right away. The taxi remained parked at the curb, hazard lights blinking with mechanical indifference. People passed by without looking inside. To them, it was just another car paused between errands. To him, it had become a sealed room where the air suddenly felt insufficient. The man's voice replayed again and again in his head. Not the words exactly, but the tone, the ease, the certainty that nothing he said could ever reach the person it would destroy. Power spoke like that, careless, untouchable. He shut off the engine. Silence rushed in, heavy and complete. For years, he had believed that truth announced itself clearly, that lies required effort, maintenance, cracks. He had believed that honesty created a kind of protection around people who practiced it faithfully. Now he understood how naive that belief had been. He drove aimlessly for hours, picking up no passengers, declining rides through the app with mechanical taps of his finger. The city darkened gradually, neon signs flickering on like open wounds. Somewhere downtown, people laughed, drank, touched each other without fear of consequence. By the time he returned home, the apartment lights were already off. He stood in the doorway for a long moment before entering, as if the threshold itself might reject him. Inside, the familiar smells felt foreign. He moved quietly, removing his shoes, placing them exactly where they always went. The discipline calmed him. Routine was something that still obeyed. She lay on her side in bed, back turned. Her phone rested on the nightstand, screen dark. He did not touch her. Sleep never came. Instead, memory arranged itself mercilessly. Moments he had cherished, replayed with altered meaning. Compliments that now sounded rehearsed. Late nights reframed as absences. Small irritations he had dismissed, now revealed as impatience, asterisk by morning. His shock had cooled into something denser. Indignation did not roar. It settled. Over the next days, he observed her the way he observed traffic patterns carefully, without interference. He noted the timing of her calls, the subtle changes in her tone when she spoke certain names. He recognized the relief in her shoulders when she left the apartment, the tension when she returned. She did not notice his attention. Why would she? He had always been invisible, even when present. He never confronted her, not because he lacked courage, but because he needed certainty. Confrontation was noise. Noise could be denied. Truth required silence. He confirmed everything quietly. Dates, locations. The imbalance was unmistakable. Her boss's influence reached into every corner of her professional life. The affair was not only personal, it was structural. Power layered over desire, shielding itself behind opportunity. She had not just betrayed him, she had stepped into a world where he did not exist. The realization stripped something essential from him, not rag. He continued driving his taxi. Passengers still trusted him. Tips still appeared folded neatly on the seat. Strangers still told him their stories unprompted, as if sensing that he would never weaponize their vulnerability at night. He sat alone in the car long after his shift ended, watching reflections move across the windshield. He considered violence briefly, abstractly, the way one considers a storm on the horizon. But violence required visibility. It required recognition that man would survive violence. What he would not survive was exposure without spectacle. The decision formed slowly, carefully, like something crafted by hand. He did nothing impulsive. Weeks passed. His wife grew careless. Confidence replaced caution. She spoke more freely on the phone. She smiled more openly at messages she assumed he could not see. One evening, she did not come home at all. He sat at the kitchen table until dawn, the chair opposite him empty. He did not cry. He did not pace. He simply remained. When she returned the next morning, she offered no explanation. She did not need to. Silence had become their language. That same day, he acted. He gathered what he knew, not rumors, not assumptions, but facts. Dates aligned, messages archived, locations confirmed, not to destroy her, not to shame her, but to remove the illusion that power erased consequence. He sent nothing anonymously. He attached his name. The envelope reached more than one destination: legal departments, boards, spouses, places where silence was expensive. Then he waited. The fallout did not come immediately. Systems resist disruption, but cracks appeared. Meetings canceled. Whispers began. The man's authority thinned as scrutiny replaced indifference. His wife came home early one afternoon, face pale, movements frantic. She spoke for a long time, words spilling out without structure. Fear, not remorse, fueled her urgency. He listened without interruption. When she finished, he stood, retrieved his jacket, and left the apartment without a word. He did not slam the door. He did not look back. The city received him the way it always had. Days later, the headlines surfaced quietly. Not sensational, not dramatic, just factual. An investigation, resignations, settlements. People were shocked not by the scandal, but by its source. The name attached to the initial disclosure meant nothing to most. A taxi driver, honest, unremarkable, invisible. His wife moved out. The apartment emptied slowly. Objects disappeared. Echoes remained. He kept driving. Passengers still trusted him. The city still moved. But something fundamental had shifted, not in the world, but in him. He had learned that decency did not protect you from harm, but it could still be used as a weapon. Time did not heal anything. It clarified in the weeks following the exposure. The city returned to its usual rhythm, but his perception of it had altered permanently. What once felt like a living organism now resembled a mechanism, efficient, unmoved by individual collapse. People lost jobs. People gained leverage. People adapted. The machine continued. He drove through neighborhoods where nothing ever changed, and others where change arrived violently, erasing names from storefronts overnight. He noticed how quickly scandal decayed into trivia, how outrage burned bright and then disappeared, leaving behind only inconvenience. For him, the consequences were quieter, heavier. The apartment no longer smelled like shared life. Her absence did not announce itself dramatically. It accumulated, an empty hook where her coat had hung, a drawer that slid too easily, the bathroom mirror reflecting only one toothbrush dot at night. He sometimes reached for his phone to send her something mundane, a reminder, an observation, before remembering there was no longer anyone on the other side of that habit. He did not miss her. He missed the version of himself that had existed beside her. The taxi became his refuge. Inside it, he still knew who he was supposed to be. The rules were clear, the expectations finite. He picked people up. He took them where they asked. He delivered them intact. No promises beyond arrival. Some passengers recognized him from the news, though none ever spoke directly about it. Recognition came instead through subtle shifts, longer looks in the mirror, hesitant pauses before exiting the car. Curiosity restrained by politeness. He wondered what they saw when they looked at him now. A man capable of disruption, or still just a driver. Indignation lingered, but it no longer burned. It settled into something colder, something disciplined. He had not acted out of revenge. Yet the outcome had resembled it closely enough to trouble him. He had believed himself above that impulse. The thought unsettled him more than the betrayal itself. One evening, while waiting at a red light, he noticed his reflection again. The lines around his eyes had deepened. His posture had changed subtly, as if bracing against something invisible. He realized he no longer expected fairness from the world, only cause and effect. His wife attempted contact once, then twice. Messages appeared and disappeared, replaced by silence. He never responded, not because he wished to punish her, but because any response would require him to re-enter a story. He had already exited. He had done what he came to do. Months passed. The man who had once occupied so much of his mental space became irrelevant. Power had shielded him briefly, then abandoned him decisively. He resurfaced elsewhere, diminished but intact. Consequence, he learned, was rarely total. That truth lingered with him more than satisfaction ever could. On a winter morning, snow dusted the city lightly, just enough to soften edges. He drove slower than usual, cautious, attentive. A young woman entered the taxi, shoulders hunched, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. She carried herself the way people did when they were trying not to collapse in public. He drove without speaking. Halfway through the ride, her breathing steadied. By the time they arrived, she looked almost relieved, not because of the destination, but because nothing had been asked of her. She left behind a scarf. He noticed only after she was gone. He considered keeping it until the end of his shift, but something compelled him to turn around. He found her 2 blocks away, walking quickly, arms wrapped around herself. He returned the scarf without ceremony. The gratitude in her eyes was disproportionate to the act. As he drove away, something loosened inside his chest. Not redemption, not forgiveness, recognition. He understood then that what had shattered him was not simply betrayal, but erasure, being rendered irrelevant in a narrative he had helped build. What he had done afterward was not about justice. It was about refusing to disappear that night. He stood at his apartment window, watching snow fall in silence. The city lights blurred softly beyond the glass. For the first time in months, he allowed himself to feel the weight of everything at once: the loss, the anger, the restraint, the quiet satisfaction, the lingering emptiness. He did not name it. He simply let it exist. Tomorrow he would drive again. He would follow streets he knew by heart. He would carry strangers through the city's veins. He would remain honest, not because it protected him, but because it was the only thing that still felt real. The world had shocked him. He had shocked it back, and in the space between those two truths, he continued, scarred, invisible, unbroken. Spring arrived without ceremony. The city shed winter, the way it always didn't, evenly. Patches of snow lingered in the shadows of tall buildings, while trees along the avenues bloomed with almost offensive optimism. Life insisted on itself, regardless of who was ready for it. He noticed the season not through flowers or sunlight, but through traffic. Construction returned. Detours multiplied. Tempers shortened. The city was alive again, restless and impatient. So was he, not restless in the way that demanded change, but in the way that refused stagnation. The quiet endurance that had carried him through the aftermath of betrayal had done its work. What remained was not peace, but clarity, stripped of illusion. He downsized his life deliberately. The apartment went first. Too much air, too many echoes. He moved into a smaller place, closer to the garage where he parked the taxi at night. Fewer windows, fewer memories embedded in walls. The move was efficient, almost clinical. He discarded nothing impulsively. Objects were evaluated, then released. Photographs last. He held them briefly, acknowledging the people frozen inside them. Two versions of himself smiled back, one hopeful, one unaware. He did not destroy the images. He placed them in a box and stored it away, not out of sentimentality, but respect for the man he had been. That man had been real. He simply no longer existed. Work continued. Passengers came and went. Some recognized him. Most did not. Fame, he learned, was temporary even when attached to scandal. People preferred novelty. Familiarity bored them quickly. Occasionally, someone attempted conversation about integrity, about courage, about what they would have done in his place. He listened without confirming or denying anything. Their projections were not his responsibility. What surprised him most was not how others reacted, but how little satisfaction he derived from their assumptions. Being seen had not healed him. It had merely confirmed that visibility was overrated. One evening, near the end of his shift, he accepted a ride he would normally decline farther out than he liked, toward an industrial stretch where warehouses outnumbered homes. The passenger was older, posture bent by time, voice roughened by cigarettes and regret. The man spoke little, but when he did, his words carried the weight of someone who had lost more than he had ever gained. At the destination, the passenger hesitated before exiting. He left behind more than the fare, a folded note, deliberate, intentional. He noticed it immediately. Inside was a simple sentence, written in uneven handwriting. Some of us notice who stays quiet. Nothing else, no name, no explanation. He sat there longer than necessary, the engine idling, the city humming around him. The note did not flatter him. It did not praise or absolve. It simply acknowledged existence, that, unexpectedly, moved him more than anything else had. He realized then that shock and indignation, the emotions that had once dominated his inner life, had transformed into something steadier. Not forgiveness, not closure, acceptance of complexity. People hurt each other, not only through malice, but through imbalance, through silence, through believing they were untouchable. He had disrupted that belief once. He had no desire to do it again. He did not see himself as a hero. He saw himself as a man who had reached a limit. Late that night, after parking the taxi, he walked instead of taking the bus home. The streets were quieter, the air warmer. Music spilled faintly from an open bar door. Laughter rose and fell like static. He passed couples mid-argument, strangers mid-connection, lives intersecting briefly before diverging forever. He felt no envy, no bitterness, only distance. At his apartment, he stood by the window again. Different view, same city. The lights flickered as they always had. Somewhere out there, his former wife lived a life rearranged by consequence. Somewhere else, Her former boss rebuilt his with diminished arrogance. He did not wish harm on either of them. He also did not wish them well. That space between was his. He turned off the light and let the darkness settle. Tomorrow would come. He would wake. He would drive. He would continue, not because the world had redeemed itself, but because he had refused to vanish. Quietly, when it tried to erase him, summer pressed down on the city with unapologetic weight, gathered between buildings, trapped itself in asphalt and concrete, turning every movement into effort. Windows stayed open late into the night. Sirens carried farther. Patience thinned. The city sweated, and so did the people inside it. He adapted the way he always had without complaint. The taxi's air conditioning worked unevenly, favoring the front seat. Passengers thanked him more than usual. Tempers flared more quickly, then cooled just as fast. Everything felt closer to the surface. Truth, he noticed, often did in the heat. He drove longer hours now, not out of need, but preference. The road filled the time that might otherwise turn inward. Motion kept memory from settling too heavily. Still, some nights followed him home. There were moments, small, treacherous ones, when he imagined an alternate version of events. A confrontation at the kitchen table. Raised voices. Explanations demanded. Choreography of marital collapse. Those fantasies never lingered. They felt dishonest. What had happened between them did not belong to the language of reconciliation. It belonged to the language of imbalance, of a decision made repeatedly, in private, and justified silently, one evening. As twilight softened the city, he found himself driving past the old apartment without intending to. Traffic had redirected him, funneling him down streets he had avoided since moving out. The building stood unchanged, stubbornly intact. Lights glowed behind some windows. Others remained dark. He did not slow down, but his eyes caught the balcony for just a second. The place where she had once leaned in the evenings, phone pressed to her ear, face turned away from him. He remembered how he had pretended not to notice, how trust had once felt like strength. The light changed. He moved on. Later that night, parked near a river that reflected the city in broken fragments. He turned the engine off and sat in the heat. The water moved steadily, indifferent to the noise above it. It reminded him of time, not how it healed, but how it carried everything forward, regardless of readiness. He wondered, briefly, if he had become harder. The answer came easily. Yes, but not cruel. Hardness, he realized, was simply the refusal to bend past one's breaking point again. Near the end of summer, a letter arrived at his new address. No return name, only a familiar handwriting. He did not open it immediately. He left it on the counter for days, walking past it without touching it, as if proximity alone might contaminate something he had stabilized carefully. When he finally did open it, he read it, standing up. The words inside were careful, measured, regret expressed without accountability, pain centered without acknowledgement of its source. An attempt, he recognized, to rewrite the past into something more survivable for the person who had caused it. She spoke of confusion, of pressure, of loneliness. She spoke of him kindly. That, more than anything else, confirmed his decision. He folded the letter once, then again, and placed it back in the envelope. He did not destroy it. He did not respond. Some stories, he had learned, did not need replies to end. Autumn arrived quietly after that. The heat retreated. The city exhaled. Leaves gathered along curbs, pressed flat by passing tires. The air sharpened. People walked faster, wrapped themselves in layers, prepared for impact. He felt aligned with the season. One afternoon, he picked up a couple, arguing in low, controlled tones. Their words were edged but restrained, each sentence weighted with history. He watched them through the mirror, not their faces, but their posture. The subtle lean away, the guarded hands. He delivered them to their destination without interruption. As they exited, the woman paused, hesitating as if to say something. Then she didn't. They walked away together, tension intact, future uncertain. He sat there for a moment after they were gone, struck by how ordinary collapse looked from the outside. No villains, no heroes, just people mismanaging proximity and power. That night, at home, he opened the box of photographs for the first time since storing it away. He spread them out on the table, one by one. He studied his own face in each image, tracing the gradual shift he had once been blind to. He did not feel nostalgia. He felt acknowledgement. Those images documented a life lived honestly, even if it had not been rewarded honestly in return. That mattered more than outcome. He placed the photographs back in the box and returned it to its place. When he turned off the light, the apartment settled into darkness that felt earned, not empty. He slept deeply. Winter returned the following year with less cruelty than before. The cold no longer felt like punishment. It felt precise, clean. The city's edges sharpened again, and with them his sense of self. He had learned how to live inside restraint, how to measure his days without leaning on anyone else's presence to give them shape. He no longer counted time from the moment of betrayal. That division had dissolved quietly, without ceremony. Past and present had stopped competing. One morning, while clearing ice from the taxi's windshield, he realized he had not thought about his wife in days. Not with anger, not with curiosity, not even with resignation. The absence of that reflex startled him more than the betrayal ever had. Memory had finally loosened its grip. Driving through the city now felt different, not lighter but grounded. He noticed details again without attaching meaning to them. The way steam rose from subway grates, the rhythm of pedestrians crossing against the light, the tired dignity of people going to jobs they did not love but depended on. He recognized himself among them. Occasionally, someone still mentioned the scandal. Less often now, it had aged into anecdote, a cautionary example stripped of nuance. He never corrected them. The truth had already served its purpose. What mattered was not that he had shocked people. What mattered was that he had remained intact. One evening, near the end of his shift, snow began falling heavily, sudden and dense. The city slowed. Traffic crawled. Horns lost their aggression, replaced by patience, forced by weather. He picked up a passenger near a hospital, an older woman wrapped in a coat too thin for the cold, her hands trembling slightly as she gave him the address. The ride was quiet. Halfway there, the woman exhaled sharply, as if releasing something she had held too long. Her shoulders sagged. She stared out the window, eyes unfocused, reflection fractured by falling snow. When they arrived, she lingered, fingers tight around her bag. She looked at him then, not searching, not expectant, simply present. She thanked him in a voice made raw by exhaustion. He nodded, accepting it without ceremony as she disappeared into the building. He felt something shift not inside his chest, but in his posture, a subtle straightening, a confirmation that being steady still mattered, even when no one noticed. That night, he did not go straight home. He drove instead to the edge of the city, where streets thinned and lights scattered. He parked near a quiet overlook engine off, snow accumulating silently on the hood. Below him, the city stretched out, vast and indifferent, illuminated by thousands of lives unfolding simultaneously. Once, that scale had made him feel small. Now, it made him feel free. He thought not of revenge, not of justice, but of choice. Of the moment he had decided not to disappear quietly. That decision had not transformed the world. It had not rewritten the rules of power. It had simply drawn a line. He had stood on one side of it, in the silence. He allowed himself to feel the full weight of what he had lost, fought what he had preserved. The marriage was gone, the innocence with it. But something essential had survived, his refusal to become invisible in his own lie.